I like very much Conrad's contradiction between maths and mass, and that's something I'm going to focus on. And I'm going to also very much pick up Conrad's assertion that to be conceptual is to be practical is to be conceptual. And the recent BBC analysis programme on Radio 4 was very interesting in that regard. And they spent quite a lot of time in discussing the national curriculum, looking at the false dichotomy between knowledge and skills. And it was well summarised by talking about the conjunction between knowing what and knowing how. Now, we know from elaborated research in respect of medical practice that knowledge is the strongest predictor of performance in that kind of domain. So the false dichotomy between knowledge and skills is very important, but that leads to some very important approaches and reorientations in our approaches to curriculum, and particularly to mathematics. I think what's been quite controversial about the revision of the national curriculum is the extent to which an unusual coalition across seeming political boundaries in the research community and in the political community, a coalition has emerged in respect of this notion of the power of powerful knowledge. And a lot of the critical discourse and quite confrontational discourse has had some quite bizarre polarities contained in that discussion. And it culminated in a history conference where someone began to assert that a child no longer needs to recall anything because it is all codified and now available through modern means. And they stopped there. I thought they were going to go on to say something else. But no, and then they argued very powerfully from that position against this notion of powerful knowledge, which has been asserted by myself, by people like Michael Young, and so on. But what I would argue is that all of the empirical evidence in respect of effective performance talks about the possession of personal capitals, the combination of knowing what and knowing how. And what we need to recognize is that possession of a personal capital is the ability to recall it from one's own array of memories and use it for cognitive work. And that will combine with stuff in the outside world, stimuli, resources, and so on. But that constitutes personal capital. That is personal capital. These knowledge and skills combined in unitary performance. And that maps absolutely to Conrad's 4 stages or elements. The first stage is recognizing that there is a problem to be solved. Recognition that there is a problem. So conceptualizing the problem, recognizing that that problem is a thing on which one needs to act. So I think we need to get away from a whole series of false dichotomies which are bogging us down, both conceptually and practically, in devising new qualification and new curricula. And I'll come on to that in just a second. So what have we got in terms of the national scene at the moment? We've got A-level reforms. So we're looking at the purpose of A-levels. And by the way, I want to reinforce a critique of this nonsense that it's only we who have these narrow qualifications called A-levels. Well, Singapore has them, well, largely because they have A-levels. But interestingly, America has A-levels. What? They have the Advanced Placement Award. 3 curriculum-linked examinations, which are as important, if not more important, in terms of college entry than the SAT. Finland has A-levels. What? Well, actually, you study about between 7 and 9 subjects, 16 to 19, but you only take 4 examinations, and one of those is compulsory. It's Finnish culture and language. When you look at those examinations, they look exactly like A-levels. Oh, and Germany's got A-levels too, because in the Abitur you do between 7 and 9 subjects, and you do 3 written papers or 4 written papers. And when you look at them, when you look at the items, they're exactly like A-levels. Now the problem is not the examinations. It's the problem of A-levels in this country is we've collapsed A-levels and curriculum. So we see curriculum exclusively in terms of the qualifications that are offered. Hence the enormous gaps in the timetables of many sixth form colleges. Okay, now that's crucial. So A-levels, in terms of the purpose and their content, need back to the topic, need to be reviewed. And the way in which we like to see that revision is new relations, not institutions. It is vital that we engage more with the requirements of higher education in specifying A-levels, not exclusively, but we engage more, and we engage in a sophisticated way, not through new bureaucracies. So let's look at the first need at system level. Systems have opened access and raised attainment by a focus on evidence-based consensus generation and concerted action at all levels in the system. That's what I've learned from the National Curriculum Review, looking at what other nations have done. Okay, I'm referring to other nations dramatically raising their attainment, particularly in mathematics, closing the gap between people from different SES, social background, and raising the overall level of attainment. They have done that, they've opened access and raised attainment by a focus on evidence-based consensus generation across society, across education and the political community, and by concerted action at all levels in the system. So, for example, the adoption of fully comprehensive education in Finland was preceded by and affected through a process of consensus generation at all levels in the system, a wide social and political dialogue. Now, one of the problems in our system, and actually focusing on needs means that this is a rather deficit presentation, because it's going to say, well, we need this because we haven't got this. One of the issues in the English system is the extraordinary and exceptional diversity in the institutional forms of our education system. Now, my analysis, which I've done over the last few years in relationship to curriculum, suggests that that's accompanied by extraordinary diversity in ideas about what's right educationally, about what works in maths education, but in education across the board. Models of ability, models of the extent to which you should be focusing on engagement through skills rather than knowledge, and so on. I can assure you can find examples of absolutely everything in the education system in this country. And that's very characteristic of England. Now, I'm not arguing against a degree of eclecticism, innovation, and conflict, because that's good. It's essential, but an excess is dysfunctional. And I think we are there. So the first need is actually look at the ideas that Conrad was raising, to look at them and see whether we can form an evidence-based consensus around them, and then move forward through materials generation and qualifications generation. Okay, we need to be clearer about what an 11-year-old should be able to do. And compensation in the form of our assessment is worrying, i.e., you can get a B, but you may not have done this in order to get that B, and somebody else may not have done that. Well, actually, some of the things that some people may not have done may be essential to the next stage in their educational progression in a particular subject. And when they find themselves progressing, they find they've got a vast hole in key aspects of their conceptual development. So we need to be very clear about that. We need to be very clear about what a 16-year-old should be able to do. All this discussion about getting rid of GCSEs is interesting. But we do now, and we will probably continue to do for a very long time, end general education at the age of 16. I'll come back to maths in just a second on that. Now, what we posited in the national curriculum reforms and in qualifications, materials and development, we were suggesting that in reform of the national curriculum and in revising qualifications and in developing materials, including textbooks, we need to have clarity in aim, and by that I mean clarity in the underlying concepts or operations which are the focus of an period of education. And Conrad hinted very strongly at that. Now that must be combined with flexible, engaging, rich and expansive tasks and activities. But clarity in the aims and underlying concepts or operations, which are the purpose of an educational exchange, is fundamental and oft neglected. So we need to be clear about that. I'm not sure that topic quite does it, because topic spans the concept and the context in which you're going to elaborate it for an individual and ensure they acquire it. It could be useful that it combines those two things, but we need to discuss that. What is clear is that curriculum design has reduced significantly in our schools, very significantly. Task design, probing and expansive talk has been neglected. So there's a need, crucial need, to increase curriculum development around task design and good probing and expansive talk. Now, that's partly to do with ideas and partly to do with the pragmatics in learning and assessment. Now, the next bit, I'm going to repeat stuff. You've heard it all before, but I think that's what consensus generation is about, constantly repeating the evidence, the building blocks upon which we can advance curriculum development, materials development, and so on. And if we look at the PISA data, we're pretty stagnant. If we look at TIMSS, we find a contradictory view. We find that we've improved in our overall score. But when you look at the composition of the improvement and the composition of things, and those things which compose the overall score upon which we have not improved, actually the story converges considerably. And then we put into the mix the King's research. And what we find is that children's proportional reasoning has not improved. It's flatlined from 1976 to 2010. Think about it. That's throughout the implementation of a national curriculum, all of the staff development around it, and all of the billions that we put in respect of enhancement through the strategies. Okay, and what we find in PISA, TIMSS, in research like the King's research, is a weakening at the bottom end of the ability range, and a strengthening in the middle, and stasis at the top end, and that's very serious. So lots of needs derive from that. What Singapore has managed to achieve through its period of improvement, dramatic improvement, is lower spread and higher overall standards, and that's what we need to move towards. The HE concerns that we hear constantly now, thank goodness, and enunciated with great clarity in terms of the deficiencies in mathematics of people progressing to higher education, those are shared with Finland. Finnish universities are saying exactly the same thing about the deficiencies in young people going through. So needs drive you towards a deficit view of the system, but there is need to optimism. Maths is still the most popular A-level. We've got a good comparative system record in terms of follow-through. People like going on to do maths. So what are the needs? And now I'll finish. I'm going to argue that we need more qualifications. Now that's odd, because people would say we have too many, it's too confusing. No, we have too many routes through Maths A-level. We have too many routes through many qualifications. But the King's work on post-16 Maths shows that we have an increasing Maths requirement in terms of higher education in subjects like biology and social science, but many kids are taking GCSE at 15 and then doing no Maths, even though they're aspiring to those subjects in higher education. And what's critical about that in terms of needs is that GCSE resits and A-level won't do it. Okay? So we need more qualifications, carefully devised through evidence. We need more pathways, in other words. And that doesn't mean highly instrumental mathematics, which is devoid of conceptual content. Rob Coe has showed us that in terms of relative subject difficulty, that physics has tumbled down in terms of difficulty. The maths has been taken out of physics, and there's a strong need to put it back in, either directly through the qualification or through adjuvant provision within those programs. We've taken the mechanics out of A-level. This has led to a deficit in some routes, not in terms of just routes into elite mathematics. What we need to pay attention to are the needs that are communicated by labour market signals. Don't listen to what employers say about what they need. Listen to what they pay for. Okay, that's crucial. And what we find is a massive premium associated with mathematics, Tim, and a continued premium.
I do want to make sure we have time for all of our panellists.
So, to conclude, where do the needs in all of this pan out? They pan out in respect of qualifications, curriculum aims and goals and content, teaching capacity, particularly in math specialists in primary, task design, probing to develop understanding, oracy in the classroom, exciting mathematics, materials to convey ideas and to condition pedagogy. But most of all, we need to change our views of mathematics. We need to change children's views so that it's not a hard subject, but it's exciting stuff which enable them to crack problems in other subjects. Those are the needs. And I think we should have considerable optimism in respect of the kind of developments which we've heard this morning in actually tackling those needs. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much.